David Shosberg asked me to look at particularly adaptation. And, there was a temptation to say, look, in the north it's all about mitigation, and in the south it's about adaptation on the ground. And it is in many ways, and that's characteristic of most southern green organisations. It is about adaptation. I told the story today about Wali in Indonesia. Their big job after the tsunami was service provision, water, shelter, etc. And that's more or less what green groups do in the south. But also it got me thinking this concept of a big difference between the northern and southern groups within the Confederation is this concept of crisis in the future versus crisis in the past. And if you're viewing Armageddon to come, then I think a little bit what Dale said towards the end there, it's about before and after. And it's about mitigation. The mitigation becomes the concept of before. But if the crisis came a long time ago, which was invasion in many of these cultures, they're not waiting for the flood came. Major catastrophe to land use, dispossession of land, fundamental changes to livelihoods. Adaptation then becomes not something that we'll do when it comes, but something that people do on a daily basis. So I got very interested in the kinds of adaptation programs that local groups are doing. For example, Friends of the Earth Brazil is very involved under their climate campaign. And it took them a while to come towards climate. They thought it was another northern form of imperialism for a while. But they ended up thinking that they could use it. Now, the reason why they thought they could use it, they could gain donor monies beyond their wildest dreams if they started framing things as climate. But also it was a good olive branch to the northern groups, because through solidarity, this transnational organisation also brings benefits to the southern members as well. So Friends of Brazil got engaged in shelter, food sovereignty campaigns about local people owning seed stocks, being much closer in food production cycles, water harvesting programs, etc., which is the obvious stuff of adaptation schemes in the community that exists now. But also I wanted to touch upon the idea that adaptations also protest in the south, and protest is ongoing. We've got this idea that protest is part of mitigation strategies to stop climate change. And so I made the point in the paper that in the north, community is something that's constructed at the point of protest. We're so dissipated in this post-political space, in this part of the world where capitalism is deemed to be won, is deemed to won, that we construct these communities of protest and as a forms of mitigating, of stopping Armageddon. Whereas in the south, with Armageddon in the past, or a major form of Armageddon, there might be others, then protest is ongoing. It's how you live. Your community's there. Capitalism hasn't won yet. In most parts of the planet, that's the case. This is the story from Friends of the Earth. So protest is part of how you live in your community on a daily basis. So I suppose in the end, it depends on whether you're putting the crisis in front of you, the flood to come, or whether the flood of blood happened a long time ago with invasion and colonisation, but also whether the whole language of the split between mitigation and adaptation doesn't work in the south. There's lots of realities. I think it came across a number of papers today. It's this, as a social scientist, you're trained in, rather than saying it's right, it exists or it doesn't exist, I'm quite willing to say it exists. But as a social scientist, I want to understand, why is this story being told? What shape does this story have? As I said today in the north, the story is not about anti-capitalism in the north, but it is in the south. So it's not about denial or acceptance. It's, as a social scientist, I'm trying to understand, how is that story being used in particular communities to further particular interests? So it's not a denial thing. I suppose the other thing as a long time an old hack greenie, and being part of NGOs myself, and headed up conservation councils and things like that, we've used science when we wanted to, and we've made science an enemy when we wanted to. In the current food security campaign, the Friends of the Food Sovereignty campaign, it's fundamentally against Western science. Western science is our enemy in that campaign. But science has become the bedfellow in the climate debate. So my argument is, it's not about because the science is good. The people got locked up when they said the planets didn't revolve around the Earth, that the universe revolved around the sun. It wasn't because the science was good those people got locked up. It was because it threatened fundamental paradigms and dominant power plays. So for me, the question is, what on this occasion, the climate story is being sold globally, but I want to understand how it's first of all framed at regional, national, local levels, and what are the adaptation strategies. The other thing I'll say is, it may be real, but so is poverty, so is dispossession from landscapes. I suppose for me, the real problem with the dominant northern climate frame is the eradication, because it's about the universal we, and it's how it's an essentialist fact and it's real, that all of a sudden all those things I learn about being a social scientist, class, gender, different norms between haves and have-nots, minority groups, that seems to be all washed under the table now, and we're all just talking about, we're all in this together, like we're all going to come out equally. The climate story, there'll be winners and losers in that climate story, and the winners will be the powerful.